Hi there, and thank you for joining us today for this Netwealth Practice Management webinar. Our series is designed to help wealth professionals discover new opportunities to enhance their business. My name is Liam, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Netwealth, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Brad Fox, the Managing Director of SmartBrave Consulting. Brad will be guiding you through the process of creating an effective strategic roadmap to not just future-proof your business, but to thrive in 2020 and beyond. However, before we do that, we'll just run through some quick housekeeping items. There is one CPD point allocated for attending this webinar. To receive this CPD point, you will need to have watched at least 30 minutes of this session. The CPD details will then be emailed to you within the next week. Also in this email will be a copy of the recording today, as well as the slides. If there's anything you would like to ask Brad today, you'll notice that on the taskbar to the right of your screen, there is a question panel. Feel free to type in any questions you have in there, and we will endeavour to answer as many as we can at the end of Brad's presentation. And if you're on the social media world and would like to discuss anything today about today's presentation, please include hashtag NetwealthInvest or @NetwealthInvest. Before we jump into the good stuff, just a little bit about who we are. In our 20th year, we are an ASX-listed company who provide an online platform to support financials with a wide range of financial products and services to help manage your clients' investments and superannuation. So partner with us, an award-winning platform to start running your business the way you want to. Some of our key features include a market-leading advisor and client portal that is intuitive and easy to use, a mobile app to help you and your clients access key info on the go, a suite of detailed reports that can be tailored to you and your clients' business needs, and access to unique insights designed to help you grow your business. Now on to our speaker. As mentioned, I have the pleasure of introducing Brad Fox, Managing Director of SmartBrave Consulting, who specializes in helping business leaders make positive change for their firm. Prior, Brad led the AFA as president and then as CEO, and was also an award-winning financial advisor and practice principal. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Brad.
Thanks very much, Liam. Today, I hope is the beginning of a process for you to have a really good look at what you want to achieve over the next 5 years for your practice. And it's a very difficult and challenging time for many practices because the nature of the business that you've been running is no longer operating in a way that it was built for in many cases. So the 5 key learnings that we want to get through today, the first one is the importance of thinking strategically and how to do that. The second is the forces that practice owners must consider in forming their plan. The third is the essentials to a good strategy. The fourth is how to win supporters to your plan. A strategy without supporters just doesn't go anywhere. And the fifth is having the courage to act. And this last point is something that I'm hearing from practice owners all around the country is an area they're struggling in. It's having that courage to make a decision and back yourself into it so that you can move forward. Let's jump into it. First up, we are in a VUCA world at the moment. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, it is absolutely everywhere. It doesn't matter which part of our financial services world we look at, almost nothing remains the same as it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. And I think it's pretty certain that we're going to see further evolution of it over the next 3 to 5 years. We already know that a number of players are leaving the industry, selling off wealth divisions from the large banks, the move from advisors from large aligned licensees into their own licenses or boutique licensees. We've got the FASEA code that's still, well, let's say it's in consultation. I'd like to say it's in debate. I hope it is, because some of that needs improving in terms of the guidance that we're going to operate to. But there's almost no part of your practice world that isn't under forces of change at the moment. But it's not unique to you. I know that when we're feeling the pain of these things, we would like it to be unique. The reality is it's not unique to us. Retail is facing it, media is facing it, even politics has gone through a different evolution stage at the moment. Universities, they've got all these bricks and mortar, yet what they're really selling now is online education. Just about every major marketplace, you can have a look at it and say that it is going through change at the moment, and a significant driver of that is either regulation or the digital evolution. So what is strategic planning? I think this sums it up best. The first part is it's challenging you to let go of things that have been successful. And that's hard. If you've got a recipe that's been working, you're very attached to it. It is difficult to let it go. But you need to in order to find what will be successful in the future. And this is the constant challenge of strategic planning versus business planning. Business planning I classify as the 5%, the 10% incremental growth, the little bit of movement year on year on year. Strategic planning is the big levers in your big business, making difficult choices and then pursuing them with high commitment and high belief in them. Let me show you a simple example. On the left here, you will see the Sony Walkman. Now, I turned 50 this year, and I was very proud to get my first Sony Walkman. It was revolutionary. You could take music with you without carrying an entire ghetto blaster on your shoulder on your push bike. This was big. But the Walkman died when the iPod was released, and Apple released the first iPod in 2001. It put 1,000 songs on your sleeve. It had a 5 or 10 gig memory. It launched at a cost of around $600, and almost overnight the Sony Walkman was dead in the water. Over the next 6 years, Apple released 14 updates or variants to the iPod, with the iPod Shuffle, the iPod Mini and the iPod Nano. They added capability to store photos. Later they added video. It went up to 32 gigs of memory, and the price came down to starting at about $100. Now that's a pretty typical life cycle development in many markets. Something comes in, it's new, it's sexy, it goes at a high price, minimal capability, and then over time the capability increases and the price reduces. Now Apple sold around 380 million iPods. But in 2007, they put into play a very important strategic decision. They decided to kill it. The iPod was their major source of revenue, and they willingly decided to let it go. So on June 29, 2007, they released the first iPhone. It took the best of the capabilities of the iPod. It added calling capability, web browsing, and importantly, they enabled it to be able to support third-party applications using the Safari engine. So look at the scale of what that decision was. You've got a market-leading product where you're world dominant with the iPod, and you knowingly decide to slash that source of revenue with a deliberate decision to achieve a new source of revenue. Now, of course, it's been a pretty good decision. They've sold up to November 2018, 2.2 billion iPhones. In fact, they chose in November 2018 to stop reporting publicly their sales figures. I'm not sure what was behind that. Perhaps it was because some competitors were starting to catch them and therefore their numbers were dropping. But nevertheless, the decision to kill the iPod and replace it with the iPhone was a strategic decision that really took courage. And they've executed it beautifully. So if we relate it back to this statement here, it was the challenge of letting go of something that had been very successful in order to find what will be successful in the future. And that's the challenge sitting in front of every practice owner in financial services now. If we look at the legislative reforms of the last 8 years, some of the effects that it's had has been the profitability of practices have dived in many cases. The traditional forms of revenue are fast disappearing, and we can put grandfathered revenue in there, change to risk commissions, etc. The cost to produce compliant advice has soared for many practices. And of course, your clients and your prospects, they're actually looking for something different now from the experience of coming for advice. They're better researched, they're better informed. I swear they've nearly all read The Barefoot Investor and think that they almost don't need you. So we've got to put something very different into a value proposition if we're going to have sustainable practices in the future. All of this amounts to one thing, and it's a paradigm shift. Now, a paradigm shift, and I'll just read the definition with you, a significant change in the way an individual or a group perceives something, and the old paradigm is replaced by a new way of thinking. Exposure to new information or experiences may make you realise your belief or perspective is incomplete or wrong. Now, with that VUCA world that we're living in, we're constantly being exposed to new information, new impacts on our environment. And unfortunately, that is meaning some of the business models that have been so successful now aren't going to cut it going forward. So that leads to the right-hand side, the business paradigm shift. This is the methods by which your business goals will best be accomplished in the future. And they're significantly different from how they can be achieved today. So we know that the revenue makeup of practices is going to have to change because of the removal of grandfathered commissions, etc. What are we going to replace it with? How are we going to bring financial security back into our practices? Clients want different outcomes. The clients want different experiences. How are we going to deliver that? All of these things, when you roll them together, create this business paradigm shift. Creating a strategic plan to deal with the paradigm shift is about you taking control and deliberately charting a path forward. It's moving from being reactive on the back foot, feeling at the effect of these things, feeling like it's being done to you, feeling like you're on the receiving end of a rough pineapple, and taking control and being proactive, making deliberate decisions and having an optimistic mindset. If we're to bring change, and I think it's worth touching on this because I know across the audience today, there'll be those that are relatively new in their practices, there'll be those that are sort of mid-career path, and there'll be those that have had a really successful journey as an advice practice owner for maybe 20, 30 or 40 years. To make change, we need to get through 3 steps. The first is a perceived need to change. And I think there's no doubt that practices are feeling this pressure. The second is the perceived capability. Can I actually do this? Is the question that you need to be able to answer. And perceived capability doesn't have to come entirely from your own skill set. Perceived capability can come with the support of others. And the final step is, are you actually ready to act? And often we're not ready to act until the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of making the change. Now, this is no different. These 3 steps here are no different than a prospect coming into you for advice. You will point out to them the perceived need that they have to receive financial advice, how it will make their position better. They won't be ready to appoint you as their advisor till they perceive there's a capability to make the changes successfully. And that's not just your capability as the advisor, that's their capability to have a different set of circumstances or financial arrangements. And the final part is ready to act. Are they actually ready to appoint you and go through making the change to their circumstances? So these 3 things, we'll come back to them right at the end of the presentation. Are we ready to do it? So the 7-step strategy master plan. First of all, I'll tell you this is a model, and all models are wrong and incomplete, but they are useful. They give you something to step through and kind of follow to drive action. So that's all this is. You can modify it to suit your particular style of thinking, but it gives you a starting plan. It's a good framework. Across the top is the insight and context. This is all the inputs in your environment around your practice. So this is the legislative change. This is the FASEA code. This is education standards. It's the economy. It's the consumer expectations. It's the digitisation of advice. It's all of the things that go into affecting your operating environment. Underneath that, 6 further steps. Picking the trends, defining your vision, a change analysis, what are you now, what do you want to become, winning supporters to help you achieve that change, building the plan, this is the detail element, and finally focus. Without focus, we'll end up with what so many businesses do, which is to create strategic or business plans and fail to execute on them. They lose their way before they get the job done. So this is what we're going to work through now. What are the forces that practice owners need to consider? Well, there's numerous, and I'm going to give you a bit of a hit list of a few to consider. This is the sort of thing where if you're a larger practice, you'd sit down with your leadership group and you'd talk through these forces and decide how impactful they are on your particular practice. If you're a really small operator, perhaps you're a one-person advisor practice with a couple of support staff, you might do this with another advisor just like you running their own small practice. Go and collaborate, share your thinking. Here's a few to get you started. Education standards, the costs and the timing to complete. You need to factor this into your planning. The supply of key staff. Can you get the advisors that you want for growth? And can you find the paraplanners to support them? We saw in the trade media last week, ANZ alone have got about 1,000 people in their remediation team. Well, there goes a fair chunk of the supply of paraplanners that's available in the market. At the moment, we're almost paying more for paraplanners than we are for advisors in some areas. It's a bit like the mining boom where a truck driver was earning $200,000. They're getting more than their job would normally be worth because the demand's there. The cost to your practice of a user pays environment, no more subsidies. So here I'm talking about what you pay your licensee to operate under their environment. That has been cross-subsidised for a long time. That's going. It's just about gone. And different licensees are projecting the costs for looking after advisors at somewhere between $45,000 and $85,000. It's a big shift from what some of you have been paying. Client service packages, are they tiered, and is each tier profitably priced? Non-traditional advice and revenue streams. If some revenue streams to your practice have been removed or are going to be removed, and the FASEA Code Standard 3 might have an impact here, then how are you going to replace that revenue? Are you going to attract more clients to the same offering or similar offering that you've been giving, or are you going to look to add other capability into your practice to support those same clients? The sources of new prospects, the brand and reputation management of your particular practice. At this time where we're hearing trust is low, you need to build trust in the brand and reputation that you have. The consumer expectations of value, what are they walking in looking for, and are you able to meet that expectation? The remediation projects, if you're still in an aligned licensee or have recently left one, this may still be a significant impact on you. Providing data, providing information, things that can take your entire practice offline for a week or 2 weeks at a time. So you need to think about that. Process improvement, how do we get better at what we do? Despite the fact it's got harder to go through all the layers of compliance, we need to therefore get more effective at getting through it. So how do we bring process efficiency and effectiveness? The need for strategy, you do need it. If those 8 things before or 9 things before haven't convinced you, nothing will. You need a plan to get through this. It isn't easy. But if you take a positive mindset and you get some leadership and vision around you and your practice, you will come through the other side of this in a far better position than you were perhaps even only 2 or 3 years ago. There will be less practices, less advisors, and more Australians needing advice. Most likely we'll move up the value chain to higher paying clients, but the opportunities are enormous. The number of Australians now with more than $1 million of investable assets beside their home just ticked over 490,000. And of those, only about 22% have an advisor. There is an enormous opportunity out there. So, I suggest you create a table like this for your practice, and you list the top 5 forces of change that are going to affect your business. I won't go through these in too much detail because you'll get the slides and you can have a read of them. But this is what I'm suggesting I'm hearing from practice owners are probably the top 5 generally across the market. The first is the removal of grandfathered commissions, and I'm excluding here life insurance at this point in time. What percentage of your revenue are you going to lose because of the removal of grandfathered commissions? I've seen practices where it's less than 1%. I've seen practices where it's as high as 68%. You need to work out what it is in your practice and have a plan to get around that. So first of all, understand what the impact's likely to be. How big is it? Then think about, on the right-hand side there, what communication strategy will you have to these clients in the next 12 months? So if grandfather commissions are going to be turned off at the end of 2020, how are you going to communicate that? What are you going to do about it? Second one is active regulation of advice fees being paid from super. So we're seeing that superannuation trustees are now under pressure to validate that what is being deducted from an account is related only to superannuation advice. Now, this hasn't really been policed in the past. It's always been there in the rules, but it hasn't been actively policed. So if you have at the moment a majority of your clients paying all of their fees to your practice from their super account, will that have to change if your advice is broader than their superannuation? The answer is yes. So how will you transition clients to paying from their cash flow? How will you explore how the advice is tax deductible? What other services might you need to add to still show continuing value now that they feel the money coming out of their wallet on a monthly basis paying you out of their take-home pay? The third one, client or prospect expectations from financial advice. They're changing fast. With one practice, I've sat in on a few client appointments recently just to see what's happening at the coalface. And one particular lady, she came in and she made it very clear in her first appointment, I don't want ongoing advice. I need someone to help me tidy up my position and point me in the right direction so that I'm clear and understand where my money is and what it's doing. But I don't need ongoing advice. I've read this. And she reaches into a bag and thumps onto the meeting table a copy of the Barefoot Investor. Now, good on her. She's educating herself and she's trying to get in control of things. But if more and more people, and if we've only got to look at the bestseller list to see the Barefoot Investor, just about every Australian must have read it, I think. And if you haven't, you should, so you understand what they're coming in having read themselves. You've got to think about your value proposition. If you want them to be an ongoing client and part with 2, 3, 4, 8, 12, 15 grand a year, what are you going to give them for that? And how does it refute what they've read in the Barefoot Investor? Number 4, the fees for no service risk. We need to engage every client annually and, these days, profitably. Do you know what it costs you as a minimum to service a client that you have to see each year? Most practices that I know that have now been through this exercise are blown away by how high that cost is. Very few practices that I can see are able to service a client profitably that is paying less than about $2,700 a year. Now, how many clients have you got under $2,700 a year? Now, I'm not saying that you can't service them profitably, but you need to know whether or not you can. So what is the appointment capacity of your practice? How many face-to-face or one-to-one, because it could be by Zoom or Skype or telephone, how many one-to-one appointments can your advisors do in a year? How many clients can you serve off that basis and at what level of engagement? If you're promising them 4 appointments, can you give them 4? If you're promising 1, can you give 1? Should you change your service packages? Should you offer transactional advice? How much do you need to charge per client? Do you need to sell your C's and D's? How can you increase capacity through either hiring, process change, or better use of tech? So all of those things, you can see this is quite a complicated one. It's a big one to understand about your practice. And you'll get a theme from this that there's a lot of questions here to answer. If we don't know where we're starting from, it's very hard to plan where you want it to go to. The 5th one, the threat that risk commissions are banned or further reduced. So how reliant is your practice on new risk commissions? Can you experiment with a combination of an advice fee and commission for risk advice, or for that matter, fee only? If you are heavily insurance focused, could you expand to other advice areas? And we could add into that, could you merge with another practice that does broader advice? Would you, given you're going to pass, pardon me, the FASEA exam, could you broaden your advice out? Now that you've passed the exam that covers all areas of advice, perhaps you've got that skill set within you and haven't actively used it. So your top 5 forces may not be the same as these, but this is an important exercise for you to go through. Use the leaders in your practice. If you're a small practice, talk to other people in a similar practice to yours so that you've got more than one angle on the thinking.
Sorry, Brad, just on those 5 forces, with
Sure.
the servicing cost of $2,700 you mentioned, it's got a couple of people wondering if that includes a profit margin.
That would include a profit margin. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And notionally, I think you don't want to be operating in this environment with a target of less than 30% EBIT. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not worth the risk almost. Yep.
Cool.
Thanks for the question. Keep them coming. So back to our strategy master plan. Those areas we've talked about there, that is about getting the insight and the context for your business. That's the green bar across the top. Next, you've got to pick the trends. So picking the trends, for me, is considering what will the most successful practices be doing 5 years from now. And you might prefer to think of 3 years or 7 years or 10 years. It's about picking a time frame that's far enough into the future that evolution and revolution can take place. So here's a few to kick off some thinking for you. Again, you may not agree with these, and that's cool. I haven't got a crystal ball. I'm only drawing conclusions from what I see, and it's perfectly fine that you see it differently. But whatever you pick here, whatever you identify as the trends, should inform the decisions you will later make about what to do for your practice. So here's a few. Number 1, I think we'll go down the path that all clients re-sign every year. So if you've got an ongoing client, you're not going to wait for the 2-year opt-in period. You're going to renew them each time you get through their annual review process. You'll be collecting most of your fees from direct debit from their cash flow, far less from super. The second one, 80% of clients use the practice's branded software. Now, the 80% is a notional figure, but I reckon most clients in 5 years' time will have some sort of app provided by their practice, not by a product provider, or not branded by the product provider. It'll be branded with the practice, so you're front and centre with them, and it's where they'll track balances. It's where they'll track cash flow. It'll have their goals in it. It'll have short-term goals that keep their plan relevant. It'll have medium-term, long-term. I think that this will be an absolute given within 5 years. The third is a new revenue stream from transactional clients. The need to prove ongoing value, and if you notionally say that $2,700 a year figure, that's on the low end. A lot of practices now are talking $4,000 and $5,000 a year. If you can't demonstrate enough value for that, you won't win the client. So what if you did well-priced, profit margin included, one-off advice for clients, and that became a new revenue stream? You then communicate with them from a marketing point of view, ongoing, until their next pivot point in their life comes up. The birth of the next child, the need to change home, the redundancy, the significant promotion, the selling of a business, the buying of a business, all those other things that bring people to us, retirement, change in health. So they still come back to you because you've been in constant contact with them through a marketing, a relevant contact plan, but they're not paying you month to month. The fourth, level commission on life insurance, I think we'll end up there. The fifth, wellbeing advice has replaced goals-based advice. So I think advice will become centred on each client's life achievements and their relationship with money. It won't be about the money. I think that's how we'll broaden out the achievement of value with clients. I think we'll start to see a lot of practices adding life coaching and career coaching as part of their service offering. The sixth, video conferencing accounts for 70% of appointments. Everyone's busy. I don't know about you and where you live, but the traffic where I live is bloody diabolical. No one wants to spend an hour in a car to get to their financial advisor appointment and then an hour to get home. Two working members in a couple are both off in different places doing different work, and when they get home they have kids to look after, so you do a video conference bringing in them from two different locations and you in your office. I think this will become just standard. Advisors will get up to 25 appointments a week. An average appointment time's down to 30 minutes. More contact to achieve change in behaviour that aligns with wellbeing advice. Number 7, practices are larger. Average will be about 6 advisors in a practice rather than about 3 today. And this is to get enough scale within a practice to handle the compliance and the paraplanning and the client experience team support that you're going to need. There's more likely to be a CEO at that size. You'll need effective use of outsourcing, and you'll probably have a pool of graduates because they'll start to complete their financial planning degrees over the next 4 or 5 years, and they're going to want to break in somewhere. They're going to be the sort of labour you're going to look for to replace, to give you more advisors to get the growth, because you've survived the next 5 years. Less practices, less advisors, more clients. So you're going to need more advisors. You're going to want graduates. Number 8, practices stick to their niche. I think we're going to see far greater targeting of clients that exactly fit your practice. Now that could be based on occupation, it could be based on personality profile, it could be based on geographic location, it could be the style of advice that you need. It might be SMSFs, it might be nothing, no SMSFs. But you will want all ideal clients rather than, at the moment, many have maybe 30 or 40% ideal clients, then a bunch of others that are providing ongoing revenue that really don't fit. Reciprocal referral arrangements for non-ideal clients between advice practices, and we'll see where the FASEA code goes in regard to Standard 3 and whether 2 professionals from different occupations can refer to each other without causing a conflict. I think there needs to be some redrafting of how that sits in the code guidance at the moment, but you will be referring out non-ideal clients probably on a non-exclusive basis, and you will hopefully be receiving referrals from other advisors that have ideal clients for you, but they aren't ideal for them. And the last is a conversion of prospects is going to be 1/3 of what it is today. I reckon good practices today probably convert still around 75 to 85% of the prospects they meet with, because they've been introduced to them by existing clients. Very warm referrals from closely connected other businesses. Most of the work is done to win that client when they come to the table. I think that's going to change. So if your conversion rate goes down, the number of prospects you need to receive will need to escalate dramatically. So what's your marketing plan? How are you going to get more prospects to the table? Number 9, technology will be pivotal to compliance. File notes are all created using voice to text. Let's stop typing and writing. SOA compliance will be checked with AI-driven RegTech solutions. No SOAs will be going out unless they've been through some sort of RegTech. And practice tech stacks will expand as holistic solutions fail to scale. The best of breed for your technology in your practice, I think, will be the way we continue to grow. There'll be more open architecture. They'll fit together better. The solutions that try to take you end to end, I still have grave reservations that they will get to the level of performance that we would hope for, because over the next 3 to 4 years, the number of practices and advisors is going to shrink substantially, in my view. So therefore, the amount of revenue to feed these sort of tech solutions will be less. Number 10, if you've got through the next 5 years, and you've made some smart, brave decisions, you will be growing, and you'll be growing fast. You'll be one of a reduced number of players, an enormous number of potential prospects. You've really honed in on the sort of clients that you want, and your marketing makes it clear who it is that you do want. So when they come to you, you're going to spend less time needing to convince them. Now, I know that's at odds with saying the conversion prospects will be lower. What we'll have to think of is that the top will be a funnel where a lot of people are interested, but they don't fit, or they don't fit now. But those that genuinely fit, you'll get them through your onboarding process much quicker. So there's 10. Your 10 don't have to align to that at all. This is a really free-form thinking. You need to put your head to how you want to interpret the world that's around you now and decide to change the things that matter to you. And what matters to you is so individual. Is it the type of client that you want to have? What is the niche? What level of profitability do you want to drive for your practice? Who's in your team? What does your team look like? What's the level of risk tolerance you have as a practice owner? What's your time commitment going to be? Are you trying to taper off and go into semi-retirement as an advisor, which I think is very hard to do given the climate we're in now? But you don't want to be killing yourself doing 70 hours a week every week either. Are you looking for succession? What does that look like? Do you want to merge? Do you want to be part of a group working closely together? Make those big decisions, then take those forces, and you'll start to define what is your vision, which is the next step. Your vision is made up of 3 things, and I'm going to go quickly through this. I don't want you to get hung up on a formula for writing your vision. Just write something that's meaningful to you and that your team can grasp hold of. If you're stuck on where to begin with that, this is one way to do it. Look at your identity, your purpose as a business, and what the helicopter view of your strategy is. So if we say it's made up of identity, that's who are we? How would we describe ourselves as a practice? The purpose is why are we here? What are we really here to achieve? And the strategy is what is it that we're actually going to do? Easiest way to look at this is a few examples. Here's a few I prepared earlier. One example, we're a highly trusted, innovative, community-connected people. That's who's in the practice, that consistently makes a positive impact on the life of every client. That's what drives them to turn up every day. That's their purpose. And they do it by educating them about money, decision-making, lifestyle choices, and keeping them focused on getting the most from their life. So very much this is what I would suggest would be the sort of thing a well-being practice would put together. Here's one on life insurance, hard-working life insurance experts ensuring our clients have the protection they and their family need and can afford. And we do it through proactive reviews, health improvement, and personal claims management. One last one, very investment-focused, safe and conservative investment-focused experts helping high net wealth clients grow and maintain intergenerational wealth whilst minimising tax. And we do it through the use of trusts, active asset allocation using index funds, ETFs, and direct held investments. Now, you've got to come up with this for your practice. And I suggest you use a little table like this to do it, which is, who are you now? Complete that first, and then vision out, who do you want to be? There will be a difference. There will almost certainly be a difference. And we've got to take the future as being this timeline out 5 years or more from today. It means reading the tea leaves of change and deciding whether how you are now, what your brand is, what all the things are around what you do, who you do it for, and who your team is and what they attach to is important. How does that fit with what you're going to need to be 5, 7, 10 years down the track? So if we then have that vision defined, and like I said, don't get hung up on the format. If you don't like that one, just use words, just write a sentence, draw a picture, but make sure it's something that is credible, that other people will want to attach to. And those other people are the people that are important stakeholders in your business. Shareholders, if you have those, and certainly your team. And also the clients that you want to keep. They've got to believe in the sense of direction that you have. Feel free to shoot any questions through as we go. If we've now mapped out who you are and who you want to be as a business, Then we need to do a change analysis. And here's a list of a dozen or so things for you to consider. These are characteristics, all things that make up a practice. The second column is you tick or cross. Is this something that you will need to put work into changing to achieve your vision over the next, say, 5 years? If it is, you would then describe that change. And don't be constrained by the space on this PowerPoint slide. This might be a document that runs over 2 or 3 pages. But what is the change you'd need to bring to the culture or behaviours of your team? What are the changes you'd need to bring to your ideal client, or your fee model and your revenue mix, or the scale of your practice? And it doesn't have to be to get bigger. It might in fact be to refine and get smaller. Your use of technology, the communication and marketing that you have, centres of influence and networks. You need to describe the change. And then on the right-hand side, as you go through building your plan, you need to be keeping in mind the priority order that you would set on these. And some are codependent. So you might number a couple of things the same, or you might rank these as simply high, medium, or low, not try to make it numerical. But this is an important part of the exercise. And when we get to the second last stage, you would be coming back and comparing your detailed plans to see that you've covered off these different characteristics that you need to work on. Again, this is a tremendous exercise to draft out and then test it with your team. Test it with the practice development manager from your licensee. Test it with some peers. Test it with a customer, a client. What a great exercise is to put on a free dinner, invite in 2 or 3 of your prominent switched on clients that don't think the same as each other, have different needs, bring in a couple of trusted mentors that you might have from around the industry, shout them all dinner and a couple of bottles of red and get some real truth syrup into them and find out what they think about what you might need to change going forward. These strategies are not built from one person's mindset. You've got to go and get other people's thinking, because you will have biases and anchors to the past that are hard to move past in many cases. Okay, so if we've mapped out the change analysis, what do you have to change? The next is you need some people on board. And a little acronym here, because we need, sorry about the slide out of order, but a little acronym here is win supporters and use mostly. The first is messaging. As the leader of a practice, you have to give absolute clarity to your other stakeholders, predominantly your team, on where you're headed. Or if you want their contribution into where that is, then be very clear with them that that's what you're seeking, that they can have input. You need to still be passionate about your business and what it stands for and who it helps and why it helps them. You need to have conviction that you will be successful, that the planning process is essential, that we will deliberately chart a path to success. You'll need to be consistent in your efforts, and you'll need to persist at times to keep your shoulder to the wheel when it all gets a little bit hard and challenging. Your messaging, therefore, needs to be regular. It needs to be open, honest, so it can be trusted. It is really hard to bring a good strategic plan together without getting outside the office, and this doesn't mean you have to take them to the Hayman Islands or something, but you need to get out of the office. It could be to a meeting room in the city, although it would be much better to go to the country. When people get fresh air and space, they think outside of the confines of their normal day-to-day thinking. So I suggest you get outside, and I suggest you get out of the city if you're in the city. Remove the distractions and get them mindful. Straight talk. No subtleties, but do make sure it's a two-way conversation. You're not going to get buy-in from people if you tell them how it's going to be. This is not a finger pointing into the chest exercise. This is, I want your help. I want your contribution. At times and frequently, this needs an external facilitator, because if we want true honesty and two-way conversations, employed people normally live in fear to some degree of the owner or their boss. if we want them to be honest about the style of the business, the shortcomings that it has, the opportunities that may lie in the future that are different to how we do things today, you need to create a safe environment for them to talk straight and for you to listen. You need to translate, such an essential role of the leader. You've got to make sense of things, you've got to share the changing paradigms, and talk about what happens if we don't change. So this is translating all those forces and insights, which not all of your team might grasp. They may not be exposed to them, or they may not have need to think about them. You sharing with them what are those forces and what do they mean. And last of all, you really need to lead. This is not about managing. This is about leading. This is about how you create a safe space to engage the protectors. So the protectors are the people in your business that don't want change. They're the ones that want it to be the way it has been because the past has worked. You need to be able to engage those protectors so that they can come on a journey with you, or you need to lose them. And you need to inspire the innovators. These are the ones that are proactive, forward-thinking. They know the problems and they want to fix them. They want a different outcome in the future than we've got today. So inspire them, but engage the protectors and bring them on the journey. And the last one is yourself. The why is for yourself. You need to role model what you expect from others. And very quickly, you may have heard of this about sweeping the sheds. On the right-hand side is the All Blacks. They're the ones that kind of launched this culture talk about sweeping the sheds. When the All Blacks play a game of rugby, at the end of the game, they clean the change rooms up themselves. They don't expect someone to come in and do it for them. All Blacks clean up after themselves. That's the catch cry. Sweep the sheds. When the West Coast Eagles won the premiership 2 years ago, the fella there with the holding the esky, which wasn't full of beer, is actually full of rubbish, was Luke Shuey, who'd won the medal for best on ground. And even if you're not partial to the West Coast Eagles, this I think you can admire. Here they are, 3 of the teammates cleaning or sweeping the sheds, cleaning up after yourself. This is all about role modelling. That's all this slide's here for. You as the leader need to role model change. You need to be flexible. You need to be able to bring others with you on the journey by sucking up the hard stuff when it comes, acknowledging it, not pretending it doesn't exist, being vulnerable, saying you have a bad day, saying that you've hit a roadblock and you need your team's help. All of that is important. That's leadership. There is no leadership without vulnerability. But you're the role model, so be the culture you want from your team. So how do we build the plan? Now, let me say first of all here, this is where most people think strategic planning starts, is with a sheet of paper with actions on it. It is not. As you can see, this is well down the process. You need to solidify your thinking, then you get to actions. And that way you'll choose actions that take you in the direction you want, not actions that are born out of knee-jerk reactions, through not considering biases that you have, through incomplete information, all of which lead to bad decision making. So this is a template you can use. First thing is, for each major thing that you want to change, is you'll outline what do we want to achieve and by when. What's the completion date? Why is this important to our strategy? Essential step. You must tie your actions back to why you wanted to do them in the first place. Because we're here talking about changes that might take 3, 4 or 5 years. You can get a year into a project and forget why the hell you started it. You've got to have the why. Why do we want this? And then finally, how will we achieve it? What are the tasks? What resources or help do you need? What celebration milestones along the way? Because if you've got a significant shift, you don't want to wait till the end before you start recognising people for their effort and their contribution. Who are the owners of different parts of the task and who are the consultants? So who do you need to talk to as you're making decisions or enacting change? A couple of examples for you. Like I said, you'll get the slides so you can read this in detail. These are just examples to show you how to use the template. First one is we want to future-proof our recurring revenue stream from the risk of legislative changes. Why is this important to our strategy? Kind of self-explanatory, but recurring revenue is the lifeblood of our practice and the driver of its valuation. We believe it is likely that legislative change will remove grandfathered investment and super commissions and introduce a ban on ongoing advice fees paid from super. So this is actually happening, right? This is a reality. So it's an easy one to interpret right now. How will we achieve it? First task, develop a client proposition for accumulation clients that take all fees as monthly direct debits. Focus on the tax deductibility benefits, the growth in their super balance and the reduction of debt. Agree the package internally by the 21st December 2019. What are the resources we need? Well, there's an accounting practice we do some work with, and they already charge in this sort of manner. We're going to talk to them about it. Marketing materials, we need marketing materials to make this sort of change, to push it through to accumulation clients. We'll get those done by February. Melissa's the owner, and we're going to consult our advisors about this because it's a change in value proposition they'll need to be across and ready to support. And we're going to talk to our licensee and make sure we're not going to cut across any rules, regulations from their point of view and get it signed off. I won't go through each line of this, but again, you'll get these slides so you can look through the detail. It's just giving you examples of how to use this template. It's not for me to tell you what strategy you need. That's not my role here today. It's to give you the tools to create your strategy. Another example, we want to reignite organic growth to achieve sufficient scale to restore our profitability to a 35% EBIT. And I've taken an example here. Our EBIT now is 22%. This is a really common one I'm hearing from practices. We lost focus on growth during recent years of industry change and profits have fallen. New business growth is the preferred way to increase revenue rather than the risk of buying someone else's book or business. We don't know what skeletons are in the closet. We don't want that risk. We want to grow our own new clients. There's some tasks to get it done. And you'll see in the second one, talk about marketing. So many practices haven't been actively marketing. More and more practices are going to need to over the next 3 to 5 years. And if it's an area of expertise you don't have, you need to work out where you're going to get it. So having built the plan, and don't forget those milestones along the way are very important to have interim steps that you'll celebrate with your team, that you're making progress. And just like you do with clients, you set a client a retirement goal, a target of funds in super to have before they retire. And let's say that's 7 or 8 years away. Well, gosh, to keep their motivation up, you've got to celebrate something earlier than waiting 7 or 8 years. Same with this. You've got to celebrate milestones along the way. How do we get focused? Last step. We're going to end talking about courage, coping, competence, and confidence. But along the way, I want you to keep this in mind. Don't sweat the detail until you need the detail. Many people get lost as they go through strategic planning because they're trying to solve the challenges in too much detail before they've got enough information. So get the bones of the structure in place, get the sense of direction clear, get the high level actions, but then create, with the second point, a rhythm that works for your team to advance things along. Now, anyone that went and saw Brene Brown in Australia when she was here about a month ago, this is one of her sayings: to be clear is kind, to be unclear is unkind. So at some point you will need detail for your team. They'll need to know how this is going to work or what their role in it is. When you need the detail, create the detail. Create it with them, share it, make it clear. But don't sweat it all at the beginning. You just don't need it. Second one, find the rhythm. Is your team reacting better to a slow and steady kind of pathway through implementing, or do they like to sprint? Do they like to get involved in a project and go hard on it for 3 months and achieve a milestone and then have a bit of a rest and get back to business as usual and then go and pick up another project? Find the rhythm of your team. And if you get it wrong in the first 6 months, change it. You don't have to get it right. All the way through this strategic planning, please don't try for perfection. It doesn't exist. Don't try to get everything right. Be prepared to make mistakes. Just stay alert to them and pivot. So slow and steady or project driven. Find out what works in your team. Different people might need to operate at a different pace. If your business is big enough, you can facilitate that. Put square pegs in square holes. A classic one we find in practices is they decide it's time to revolutionise the use of tech in the business, and they give the project oversight to someone who has no interest in tech. That's a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't work. Square pegs in square holes, round pegs in round holes. Right person, right role. And avoid burnout and change fatigue. You can't change endlessly. It's exhausting. You probably feel that way now, some of you out there, from the last 3 or 4 years, right? Change fatigue is real. Avoid burnout by putting a sensible pace of change in place for your business. If you think of the number of things you need to change, that slide with about 12 items on it, you can't do it in 1 year. It's 3 years to change a significant amount of your business. Be realistic, which is the third point. Be both a realist, but also be an optimist. You need to get up with a smile, even when you're feeling shitty. You need to convince yourself to be optimistic about the future. And if you can't, you won't be able to lead change. If you can't lead change, sell your business. You need to be optimistic, and this is you working on yourself. So it's having a growth mindset. It's the positive affirmations that you're up to the task. It's surrounding yourself with positive people that will egg you along and push you along, not unrealistically, but realistically. And when you get it wrong, and you will make mistakes, no doubt about it. Everyone does. It's normal. Be prepared for it. But when you do, recognise it early and pivot, make a change. And finally, report regularly on progress. So keep these sessions away from business as usual. Don't tuck them on the end of the work in progress meeting of which clients are up to which stage of implementation. Keep it away from that. And whether you have your team meeting on these things weekly, fortnightly or monthly, or you have small teams doing projects that might be meeting regularly, but the whole team gets updated once a month or once a quarter, work out what fits with your team. And the best way to work out what fits with them is ask them. Don't be the boss who guesses and tells them we're doing weekly this and fortnightly that. Ask them. Ask them what will work with them. After a quarter or so, review it. Is it working? If it's not working, change it. Last point. It takes an enormous amount of courage to drive change. It takes self-belief. I mean, courage, the definition of courage is taking action despite the presence of fear. And most of us do fear change. But you need the courage to start, to take the first step. And then don't be too hard on yourself and your team. Recognise that everyone will go through a period of coping when they make change. Coping is when you get almost as many things wrong as you get right. You have to change things as you go along. You realise that your grandiose idea is not going to work and you have to pivot and change a bit. It's an awkward stage, and we've all been through it when we've gained any sort of skill. When we were riding a bike, we got it. When we learnt to walk as a baby, we got it. It doesn't change. We go through this coping. It's just part of our brain. It's the way it works. Until it's wired in a new way, it wrestles with change. That's coping. Positive affirmations, checking in with your team, being kind, recognising progress, that's what gets you through to the other side of coping, which is when you're competent. It's when the things you want to change have become normal. They've become business as usual. Along the way, that's what generates, as we get more layers of competence, we get confident. And we could draw this instead as a circle. When we're confident, we're far more likely to be courageous. So start your day with a really clear vision of what success looks like each day. If you're the leader of your business, you're the owner, be clear for each week. What is a step forward in your strategic plan that means by Friday afternoon, you're going home with some sense of achievement? Give the gratitude to your team for the progress they make. Give gratitude to your team for the effort they put in, even if progress isn't made. They're the things that get you through coping to competence, keeps your team confident, keeps them in a growth mindset where they're ready to keep changing and getting a better and better practice to give better and better service and outcomes for more and more people. There we go. That's strategic planning. We said we'd come back to this. A perceived need. I'm sure you enrolled today because you perceive a need to have a strategic plan. I agree with you. You do. You do need one. Your perceived capability, hopefully today, has helped improve your readiness to proceed and have a crack at drafting a strategic plan. And I hope that you're ready to act. If you're ready to act, get your first step done. Go to your diary before you sign off from the webinar today and put in the first steps you want over the next 4 weeks. You don't have to complete this whole plan in 4 weeks, right? This is a plan that's going to take you perhaps 3 to 5 years to execute. If it takes you 3 months to write it, that's okay. Do a good job of it. It doesn't have to be in place by the 1st of January, but it needs to be quality. So spend the time. By a week from now, complete the insight and context. A week later, have identified the trends and tested that thinking. A week after that, get your vision done, etc. Put some calendar milestones in now before you finish today so that you at least start the process, take the first step in the right direction.
All right, thank you, Brad. Listeners, I hope you found that enjoyable, and that's provided some food for thought about what you should be doing for the years ahead. I realise we just hit the hour mark, so we'll maybe hang around for 5 more minutes if you can to answer some questions. If you can't, totally understandable. You'll still get your CPD points. Just look out for an email within the next week. It will have those as well as a copy of this presentation and the slides that Brad has presented on today.
Liam, if people want to work with me on putting a strategic plan together, it depends on the size of your practice and the complexity of your model, the number of your team that we want to engage. But just as a ballpark, that'll usually run between 6 and 16,000, between 6 and 16,000 to do it. So if someone wants that external help, feel free to shoot me an email on the address that's on the screen there.
Excellent. Yep. As I said, details are on the screen for anyone interested in taking up Brad's services and help there. A couple of questions that I've gone through. Do you have any visibility over what practice valuations are at now, and where do you expect them to be in 5 years' time, such as 5 times EBIT or?
Great question. And the answer lies in the quality of your practice. There's the spectrum, if you like, of valuations has got much wider than it was a couple of years ago. So I'm still seeing transactions taking place on an EBIT basis at around 7 times EBIT, but that's a pretty good practice. That is all engaged clients, high ongoing average revenue, and at the other end, well, I know firsthand of an example of an older advisor, heavily risk revenue based in his practice, has had 2 deals more or less in the bag that have then fallen over completely at the due diligence stage because his practice isn't fit for sale right now. So valuations are somewhere between 0 and maybe 7 times EBIT, or if you like the recurring revenue method, somewhere between 0 and still some taking place at around 3 times recurring revenue. So that it's all back to quality. It's not like it was 2 or 3 years ago where it was kind of hovered around that 2.7 to 3.5 times revenue and there wasn't a lot of variation. Now there's a lot.
Excellent. Hope that answers that question. We've got another interesting one regarding robo-advice. Do you think there's a place for it perhaps in the future for it to help service those C&D clients until they're ready to mature, or even perhaps overcome that referral barrier that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, look, I'd like to think that there's going to be, because I'm pretty certain that middle income Australia are going to struggle to afford financial advice for a while, because the minimum fee that it takes to be profitable is just going up and up. So I hope that we do get better robo-advice solutions that can look after perhaps the lower end of the market. But I am also convinced that nothing is going to replace the feeling of comfort that comes when someone is uncertain, getting eye contact, belly to belly, in a face-to-face meeting. That is still going to trump every other source of advice. So what will people be willing to pay for that? And will they want to pay for it as an ongoing client endlessly? I'm not so sure. That's going to come down to your value proposition. But robo-advice, there is a place for it. I think it's a mile away from helping in difficult circumstances. It might help with the tea and toast. Am I in the right amount of risk in my super fund? Is my super fund charging too much in fees and investment costs? It might take care of some of that basic needs. But when you are faced with those awkward trade-off choices that we get, which tend to happen particularly by the time you're married or divorced and got kids and $1 million in debt and change of employment, and you're feeling burnt out in your late 40s, early 50s, and people want people.
Yep, absolutely. Final question. Say a business has identified an area of change, and they've got the plan ready. What is an appropriate or perhaps realistic time for them to fully, from start to finish, implement that change? Or is it sort of how long is a piece of string quite?
It's a bit how long is a piece of string, but you need momentum.
Yep.
So rather than the focus on how long from start to finish, try and chunk that down into bite-sized pieces that you can keep people's enthusiasm behind, where you're making enough progress regularly that it doesn't turn stale. No one likes looking, look at your to-do list, right? I encourage you all just to think about what's on your to-do list now, and I guarantee you there's something there that's been there for more than 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks, and every time you look at it, you go, oh shit, I got to get that done today. It's annoying you, it's bugging you. You don't want strategic change to fall into that category. So you've got to keep chunking it down to get bite-sized pieces so you get progress. Progress creates momentum. Momentum creates buy-in and enthusiasm, and it leads to confidence that you can keep creating the change you want. So if you've got a big thing that looks like, geez, that's 3 years, either don't start that part of it yet, start it later when you're more ready for it, or break it down into subcomponents.
Awesome. Well, Brad, thanks again. We'll end it there. Listeners, thank you for joining us. Before we go, just a couple of reminders. There was one CPD point allocated for this webinar, and that will be circulated around to you in an email within the next week. Also, in that email will be a link to the webinar recording today and Brad's slides. If you enjoyed today's webinar, you may also enjoy our CPD portfolio construction webinar. Next, we have Gavin Peacock from CBRE presenting on the rise of global listed infrastructure and why now. So tune in, register to see his insights on what that asset class means for portfolios and its unique features. And also, if you haven't already, check out our redesigned insights page, which you can find easily on our website, which has been revamped to help you access the information of greatest interest to you or to find it. On here, you'll be able to find our podcast series Between Meetings with Matt Heiner, where he chats to industry experts, one of which was Brad earlier on in the series. So if you enjoyed his webinar, you'll also like to hear more insights from him in that episode. It's one of our most popular too, and there's a new episode coming out very shortly. And finally, even though school's coming to a close for the year, it's never too late to refer a teacher to Banker, our program that we sponsor to help improve financial literacy in schools. It's a fantastic way to change a classroom into a virtual economy and teach kids essential financial life skills such as superannuation, tax, borrowing, real estate. It's amazing, and if you know a teacher, refer them. You can get a whole classroom on us free of cost to them, and it's just amazing. So once again, thank you, Brad. Thank you, listeners, and we hope to see you for our next webinar in a month's time.